In 12 days, the condemned lantern wax rooms would be emptied, and every heat-damaged figure judged worthless would be destroyed. The notice had been pasted across the front doors so firmly that Agnes Rowe tore its lower corner when she unlocked them. July heat pressed against the glass. Behind it stood a narrow Victorian building of soot-dark brick and painted stone, 4 stories high, with blind upper windows and a cracked lantern skylight that had given the exhibition its name. The gilt letters above the entrance had lost everything but lantern rooms. Agnes stepped inside, carrying a wooden case of modeling tools, a carpet bag, and the knowledge that, as of that morning, neither her skill nor her reputation belonged anywhere else. Victor Latham had chosen the unveiling of a duchess's wax portrait to dismiss her. Before guild officials, newspaper men, and patrons of his fashionable imperial gallery, he had lifted the velvet from a likeness Agnes spent 5 months sculpting. The face possessed the duchess's small impatience around the mouth, and the uneven eyelids no society photographer dared preserve. Latham accepted the applause, then announced that Agnes had stolen private molds from his studio. Miss Rowe confuses the mechanical labor assigned to her with artistic authorship, he said. For the protection of our patrons, she is no longer employed. He produced 2 plaster negatives from a locked cupboard and called them proof. Agnes recognized them as her own working pieces. She also recognized the small chip beside the left nostril, caused when Latham's assistant removed 1 mold before the plaster set. She said so. Latham asked the guild chairman whether a woman who admitted such intimate knowledge had not confessed enough. Her tools were carried into the street. 5 weeks' wages were withheld against alleged damages. By noon, 2 portrait studios had returned her letters unopened. A solicitor named Isaac Quenby found her outside the Imperial Gallery. Tabitha Crowe, Agnes's first teacher, had passed away after several weeks in the county infirmary and left her the lantern wax rooms in the town of Mardenwick, together with its unpaid rates, dangerous building order, and disputed contents. Tabitha had owned the property outright, but closed the exhibition 6 years earlier when a fire damaged the rear moulding rooms. Latham appeared while Quenby was explaining the will. He had been notified as a creditor because his father once financed part of the lantern collection. Mrs. Crowe's final joke, he said. A wax museum in midsummer, inherited by a sculptor the guild will not recognize. He offered Agnes £20 for the land and assumed liability. The money would keep her widowed mother, Edith, in their rented rooms through winter. It would not restore the molds Latham had taken, clear Agnes's name, or explain why he offered 4 times the property's assessed value before she saw it. Agnes accepted Tabitha's bequest instead. Now the abandoned exhibition smelled of dust, old fabric, beeswax, and the faint mineral damp of plaster. Rows of figures waited beneath grey sheets. The front gallery floor remained level, but a crack crossed the ceiling toward the rear. Agnes tested each board before walking. She knew waxworks were built to deceive the eye. She would not let architecture deceive her feet. The first figure she uncovered was a naval officer whose face had sagged toward one shoulder. Next came an opera singer with one glass eye clouded. Every display had a tarnished brass nameplate, except a seated woman behind a freestanding screen near the north wall. The unnamed figure wore plain black and no jewelry. Her hands were roughly modeled, but the face was extraordinary. Fine color lived beneath the surface rather than upon it. Broken capillaries, faint freckles, and the blue cast of skin near the temple appeared suspended in translucent layers. Agnes moved closer. Along the right jaw lay a shallow line that was not part of the woman's expression. It followed the edge of a scar. Another profile showed faintly beneath it, as if the face had once been different and someone had laid a second portrait over the first. Agnes opened her tool case. She did not touch the wax. Heat from her hand could alter what she meant to examine. Through a magnifying lens, she saw 3 short parallel scrapes beside the ear, then a curved finishing stroke. They were her tool marks. At 18, Agnes had made a narrow steel loop from umbrella wire, flattening one side because Tabitha's tools were too large for eyelids. She still finished delicate wax with the same 3 strokes and turn, yet she had never sculpted this woman. Something clicked in the entrance gallery. Agnes followed the sound and found a kerosene warming lamp standing beneath the broken skylight. It was lit, though the doors had been locked. Its chimney was warm. A clean rectangle in the dust showed where someone had moved it from the ticket desk to a position facing the unnamed figure. Around the figure's neck, below the wig, ran a ring of numbered pinholes. One contained softened wax and a fresh thumbprint. Someone had tried to melt the face before Agnes arrived. She extinguished the lamp, opened the shaded north vents, and lowered faded blinds over the skylight. Wax needed steady coolness, not cold, and certainly not a draft full of grit. She recorded the room temperature with Tabitha's wall thermometer, then drew the figure from 4 angles without shifting it. Footsteps sounded outside. Agnes expected Latham. Instead, a short man with a carpenter's square entered behind Quenby. "Barnaby Sedge," he said, "Borough Surveyor. The rear gallery can kill you. The front may merely bankrupt you." Sedge inspected the stair, joists, cracked skylight curb, and fire-damaged molding room. He prohibited access beyond a chalk line, 20 feet behind the nameless figure. Temporary work would require a roof screen, 2 shores beneath the second-floor landing, removal of loose cornice, and a separate ventilated cabinet for inflammable materials. The estimate was £11, not including rates. Agnes possessed £1 and 13 shillings. "The clearance date stands," Sedge said. "If you cannot stabilize the occupied front rooms, the borough will remove everything and demolish the rear." Quenby added another difficulty. Latham claimed an old chattel mortgage over all figures, molds, display cases, and workshop equipment. The building belonged to Agnes. The movable contents might not. "Can he take the unnamed woman?" Agnes asked. "If the mortgage is valid, possibly." "And destroy her?" "Ownership and good judgment are not the same thing." Agnes showed them the warming lamp and fresh thumbprint. Sedge sealed the side entrance, where a narrow latch had been forced. Quenby wrapped the lamp's wick and recorded its condition. Neither called it proof against Latham. Kerosene lamps were common, and the print had no name attached. At dusk, Edith arrived with bread, a kettle, and an expression sharpened by worry. She examined the damp ticket office, where Agnes proposed they sleep. £20, she said. "You refuse £20 for this." "Yes. I want to understand why." Agnes looked through the doorway at the nameless face. "Because he wanted it before I knew what it was." It was not enough of an answer, but it was honest. They spent the night in the front ticket room with no lamp after sunset. The heat eased. By dawn, the unnamed figure no longer wore the same face. Nothing had moved. As the outer wax cooled and contracted, the scar line became narrower, while an older ridge appeared beneath the left cheek. The effect was physical, not supernatural. Tabitha had built the portrait in layers, with slightly different wax mixtures, each responding to temperature at a different rate. Agnes recognized the principle from her apprenticeship. Tabitha used a harder beeswax and resin base beneath a softer tinted surface when modeling replacement ears or noses for people injured by fire or disease. The work belonged to the border between portraiture and surgical craft. Latham publicly dismissed such pieces as false faces. Privately, he had used their color methods to make society likenesses seem alive. A knock came at 9. The visitor was a woman of 45, with a pale, puckered scar running from her hairline to the corner of her mouth. She introduced herself as Mercy Haldane, once a dyer at Bracken Works. "Tabitha sent for me before she died," Mercy said. "She wrote that the lantern would pass to a woman who knew how to look without staring. Agnes invited her only into the safe gallery. Mercy stopped 6 feet from the unnamed figure. "That is not a woman," she said. "It is a figure. I mean, the face is not one woman. Part of that cheek was mine. The eye belonged to Sarah Knoll. The jawline came from little Bet Ramey after the boiler burst. Tabitha made studies so injured girls could see what might be restored before a surgeon touched them. The Bracken dye house explosion had killed 9 women and burned 23 12 years earlier. Newspapers praised the proprietor's relief subscription. Mercy said most money paid for a memorial and the men's families. Disfigured women were offered places in distant laundries where customers would not see them. Tabitha and a surgeon named Dr. Lucian Bell had used the Lantern workshop to make light facial prostheses, tinted wax shells, and teaching models. They protected patients by coding pieces instead of displaying names. "Why did the work stop?" Agnes asked. Mercy glanced at the covered figures. Mr. Latham's father financed the public exhibition. He said private repairs were wasting materials. After he died, Victor took the best molds. Tabitha closed the doors rather than let him exhibit us as curiosities. Mercy would not make a formal statement yet. Agnes was still the sculptor from Latham's newspapers, accused of stealing molds. She left one object behind, a small wax ear wrapped in cotton, made for her after the explosion. Inside its plaster backing was stamped L7. The unnamed figure bore the same letter beside its 7th pinhole. By noon, Latham's offer rose to £35. Agnes sent it back unanswered. Refusing money did not create timber. Agnes began with the only asset no creditor could carry away, her hands. She cleared the ticket office, scrubbed its north window, and posted a notice offering modest portrait medallions, mourning miniatures, and repairs to household wax seals. The first customer was an undertaker who wanted a cracked plaster hand restored for his coffin showroom. Agnes charged 3 shillings, requested half in advance, and made him sign that the piece would not be represented as a cast from any named dead person. "You have become particular since leaving Mr. Latham," he said. "I was particular before. Mr. Latham was not." Mercy returned with 2 former Bracken workers, Sarah Knoll and Cora Pike. Sarah wore a tinted wax shell across one temple, secured beneath her hair. Cora had lost 2 fingers and carried Tabitha's plaster study of her hand. The women agreed to identify coded pieces if Agnes wrote exactly what each knew and allowed them to strike out anything they did not consent to publish. Their knowledge transformed the numbered pinholes. Each number corresponded not to a patient but to a facial region: brow, eyelid, cheek, nose, ear, upper lip, jaw, chin. Letters identified sequences of treatment. The unnamed figure was a comparative model. Thin, removable layers showed injury, proposed correction, healed result, and prosthetic alternatives. It had no name because no single person should bear every wound. Agnes tested the interpretation without touching the figure. She copied 3 pin groups onto paper and asked each woman separately what she remembered. Their answers agreed on 2 and differed on the 3rd. Cora believed pin 4 marked a nose shell. Mercy remembered a cheek plate. Agnes recorded both possibilities. A code reconstructed from memory could guide investigation, not settle it. The tool marks beside the ear still troubled her. She searched the front cabinets and found ordinary workshop objects: pigments in stoppered bottles, boar bristle brushes, glass eyes, wire gauze, and wax cakes wrapped in supplier paper. No secret drawer opened. Behind the ticket counter stood a bundle of Agnes's apprentice exercises labeled in Tabitha's plain hand. One was a generic eyelid she had sculpted at 18 with the 3-stroke loop technique. Its plaster negative was missing. Tabitha could have incorporated that exercise into the unnamed face, giving Agnes's marks an innocent history. Or Latham could have pressed the missing negative into softened wax recently to implicate her. The surface alone did not decide between them. Agnes made a controlled study before drawing another conclusion. She bought 2 ounces of clean beeswax, a little resin, and earth pigment from a chemist who entered each item on a receipt. On 3 plaster cheeks, she laid mixtures of different hardness, marking each layer with a pin pattern unrelated to the lantern codes. Mercy and Cora watched. Edith recorded the room temperature every hour. The first trial failed because Agnes used too much resin. Its surface cracked before the lower wax responded. The second softened uniformly and revealed nothing. Only the third behaved like the unnamed face. The outer skin relaxed, while the harder ridge beneath remained legible. The experiment showed that layered profiles could emerge through heat without trickery. It did not establish who made the original, what each profile meant, or when it had been altered. Agnes kept the failures beside the successful cheek. When a Chronicle reporter visited, she refused to warm the nameless figure for a dramatic demonstration. She showed him the test pieces instead, and made him print that the original would not be manipulated for entertainment. His article still called the face "the woman who changes at dawn," a phrase that brought curious crowds to the pavement. Agnes closed the blinds and charged no admission. Curiosity could pay rates, Edith argued, but it could also turn patients into a spectacle before they had chosen to speak. That decision earned little money and one useful ally. Bevan Holt, the photographer, had come expecting a marvel. He stayed because Agnes could distinguish a repeatable result from a claim. He offered to document the figure at fixed distance, light, and temperature with a measuring scale beside the head. Each plate would show conditions written at the edge. The arrangement gave later changes a trustworthy comparison instead of a visitor's memory. Quenby located the chattel mortgage at the borough registry. It covered public exhibition figures purchased with Latham family funds, but excluded surgical studies, patient appliances, and instructional matrices belonging to the Lantern Restoration Circle. The circle had no surviving rulebook in the registry. Latham argued it had never been a legal body, and that every object in the museum was a public figure. The nameless woman's status became crucial. If it was exhibition wax, Latham could claim it. If it was an instructional model, it fell outside his mortgage. The distinction could not rest solely on Agnes, who now owned the building and disputed Latham's authorship. Dr. Lucian Bell had died 5 years earlier. His former surgical assistant, Thomas Vere, lived in York but refused to answer letters. The apothecary who supplied Tabitha had retired. The Bracken Company records described all payments after the explosion as charitable gifts and named no prosthetic work. Latham exploited the uncertainty. He told the Mardenwick Chronicle that Agnes was inviting vulnerable women into a condemned curiosity shop and persuading them to identify pieces she had altered. A sanitary committee member requested an inspection of pigments, solvents, and deteriorating wax. The danger was not invented. Some Victorian colorants contained lead or arsenic, and old turpentine remained flammable. Agnes welcomed the inspector, listed every substance, sealed hazardous jars, and moved them into the ventilated cabinet Sedge required. The work consumed money meant for roof cloth. It also deprived Latham of his easiest accusation. Portrait commissions slowly arrived. Agnes modelled a baker's 2 children from sittings rather than masks, a safer and more humane process for living subjects. She made small clay studies before committing wax, let customers see every stage, and wrote the artist's name on the receipt. Edith kept accounts at the ticket desk and discovered she was better at refusing credit than Agnes. With £4 earned and 3 borrowed from Quenby against future work, Agnes hired Gideon Moss, a joiner who had once built lantern display cases. He shored the front stair and fitted canvas shades beneath the skylight. Sedge approved occupation of the first gallery and ticket office for another 20 days, though the rear rooms remained sealed. Moss remembered Tabitha's instructional work. She asked me for shallow drawers wide enough for faces, he said. Mr. Latham made me remove them when he took over accounts, said the public preferred whole bodies. Where did the drawers go? Rear moulding room, perhaps. I never saw them again. The room was not hidden. Fire had damaged its stair and roof, making entry unsafe. After Moss braced the landing and Sedge inspected it, Agnes, Mercy, and the surveyor entered in daylight wearing dust cloths and carrying no flame. Heat had buckled the plaster ceiling. Wooden shelves lined the walls, their lower drawers blackened but intact. Most matrices were empty. Dust outlines showed where oval negatives, ear forms, and nose molds once stood. 7 remained, each bearing a letter and number. A long work table held calipers, mesh, rolls of fine gauze, and a mechanical head support designed to take measurements without pressing injured skin. No book of formulas waited to explain everything. Tabitha's method survived in working order: graded wax samples, measured mesh, pigment swatches, numbered pins, and plaster matrices that could be compared. Agnes matched matrix L7 to the inside of Mercy's prosthetic ear. It fit precisely, without touching the wax surface. Matrix S3 aligned with the unnamed figure's left cheek. Beneath its plaster rim were 2 marks: Tabitha's crescent cut and Agnes's 3-stroke turn. Agnes understood. Tabitha had taken the apprentice eyelid negative and reworked it into a softer edge for facial restoration. The model carried Agnes's contribution because her teacher had developed it, not because Agnes created the entire face. On the work table lay a stack of photographic glass plates in grooved boxes. They were labeled only with codes and dates. Agnes did not hold them to the window where sunlight could damage the images. A photographer named Bevan Holt agreed to make contact prints under controlled light. The first plates showed not sensational injuries, but hands, profiles, prosthetic fittings, and clay stages. Faces were cropped, unless the patient had signed a separate consent mark scratched into the plate corner. One photograph showed Victor Latham at 19, standing beside Tabitha and holding the unnamed face before its outer layer was applied. On the reverse of the plate wrapper, Tabitha had written, "VL received matrices 2, 5, 8, for exhibition color trials only. Return due Michaelmas." The missing matrices included those numbers. Another plate complicated the story. It showed Tabitha presenting a finished cheek shell to Arthur Bracken, proprietor of the dye house, while injured workers sat beyond the camera's edge. A printed caption prepared for the exhibition described Bracken as sole benefactor. Mercy saw the image and left the room. Agnes found her in the yard. Did Tabitha agree to that caption? She agreed to anything that kept materials coming, Mercy said. Then she crossed his name from our copies. We thought that made it honest. Perhaps it only made 2 stories. The criticism mattered. Tabitha had protected women, but also used their injuries to secure wealthy support. Some patients consented, others were never asked. Agnes could not build a just legacy by making her teacher incapable of wrongdoing. They convened a meeting before printing another plate. Sarah wanted the Bracken image preserved as proof of the company's involvement. Cora wanted it sealed because her sister appeared in the uncropped original. Mercy proposed that the circle keep the plate, permit only the cropped technical section in legal proceedings, and withhold the full image from public exhibition. Agnes accepted the patient's decision, even though the complete photograph would have strengthened her case. The choice forced them to seek other proof. Quenby found Bracken's annual charitable report at the library. Its material payments matched Tabitha's supplier dates, but exaggerated the proprietor's gifts. Honora Bale's invoice counterfoils later showed that half the wax was purchased with women's weekly contributions, not Bracken money. A former bookkeeper, Samuel Doss, remembered being ordered to combine those pennies under miscellaneous workshop receipts. He would testify only if shown documents that refreshed his memory. The invoices supplied that foundation. His recollection did not have to stand alone. Agnes then visited the site of the old dye house with Mercy. The works had become a carpet warehouse, but a surviving infirmary bell carried a brass plate listing the Public Relief Committee. The lantern circle was absent. Mercy did not call the omission proof of theft. She called it the reason private evidence mattered. Latham had possessed parts of the system for more than 20 years. The photograph did not prove he stole Agnes's recent portrait work, but it destroyed his claim that the layered method originated at his Imperial Gallery. Quenby prepared an application to restrain Latham from disposing of lantern matrices. Before he could file it, a 16-year-old girl named Eliza Dune came to the ticket office with bandages across her lower cheek. A paraffin stove had overturned in the laundry where she worked. The infirmary treated the burn, but contracting skin pulled at her mouth and made eating difficult. A surgeon recommended a protective molded shield during healing, which her employer would not fund. Dr. Wycliffe Dane, a cautious local physician, examined Eliza in the presence of her aunt. He would supervise any fitting, but warned that Agnes's most stable wax-resin mixture required materials she had reserved to make protective copies of the unnamed figure's layers. There was enough for the evidence, or for Eliza, not both. Mercy said nothing. She did not need to. The lantern work had never existed to preserve objects, while a living woman went without help. Agnes used the material for Eliza's shield. She made a plaster study beside the physician, never applying setting material over damaged skin. She built a gauze-supported shell from the measurements, tested its edges on a clay form, and adjusted it over 3 fittings. Eliza chose the color. The result was not invisible and made no promise of beauty. It protected the healing cheek and allowed her mouth to move with less strain. Latham's newspaper called it evidence tampering. He claimed Agnes had consumed original lantern materials to fabricate a grateful witness. The guild chairman suspended consideration of her complaint until ownership of the formulas was established. Eliza wore the shield anyway. "If they say you spent the wax," she told Agnes, "write that you spent it on me." Agnes entered the cost, material, supervision, and result in the open account book. Eliza signed beneath it. The entry was the first new lantern case recorded with a patient's full consent. That night, someone shattered the skylight. A brick struck the unnamed figure's shoulder. Hot air from the roof space poured through the broken panes. By the time Agnes reached the gallery, the outer facial layer had begun to shine and slip. She did not put cold water on it. Sudden cooling would crack the surface and trap moisture between layers. Moss stretched canvas over the skylight, while Agnes lowered the room temperature gradually with shaded ventilation. Mercy supported the figure's head without touching the face. Dr. Dane brought clean gauze and watched the softened wax settle. The outer cheek tore under its own weight. Beneath it appeared a second face, one eyelid closed, the lip drawn upward by a modeled scar, the left temple flattened. Numbered pins separated the layer from the harder base. Agnes photographed nothing until Bevan Holt arrived and recorded the damage in the presence of Sedge and Quenby. The brick had carried no message. A boy in the alley admitted that a man paid him 6pence to throw it at the roof after midnight. He described a dark coat and a missing front tooth, not Victor Latham. The evidence established deliberate damage, but not its author. The damage created a second crisis. The borough sanitary inspector feared softened wax, fallen glass, and old pigments would endanger neighboring shops. He ordered the front gallery closed to customers until debris was removed, and air samples showed no dangerous dust. Agnes lost portrait income on the same day she needed canvas, glazing, and a night watchman. Edith proposed moving the ticket desk onto the pavement beneath an awning. Sedge approved a narrow working area separated from the public by a barrier. For 5 days, Agnes modelled portrait medallions in the doorway, while townspeople watched her hands and whispered about the changing woman behind the blinds. Some asked whether the wax figure screamed when it melted. Others left pennies without asking for anything. Agnes returned every anonymous penny by placing a labelled collection box for roof repairs beside the desk. A contribution without terms might later be described as admission money to view the patients. The box received less than rumour suggested, but its total could be accounted for. Moss slept in the yard with a dog borrowed from his brother. Mercy organised former patients into 2-person watches during daylight, never alone and never in unsafe rooms. The arrangement cost no wages only because the women voted to treat those hours as circle contributions and entered them at the same rate skilled attendants would receive. If funds were restored, the hours would be reimbursed before any new exhibition expense. Agnes disliked owing them. Mercy reminded her that refusing all help could become another way of controlling the work. The moral difference lay in whether assistance was recorded, chosen and repayable, not in Agnes preserving the comfort of appearing self-sufficient. Latham moved through law instead. The following morning, his solicitor produced the chattel mortgage and requested immediate removal of all figures for safe conservation. A magistrate granted an inventory order, but required the borough surveyor to supervise. Quenby objected that instructional pieces were excluded. The magistrate reserved that question for a hearing in 6 days. Until then, Sedge sealed the gallery. Agnes could no longer stabilize the face she owned as part of the building, but might not own as an object. Heat continued beneath the canvas roof. Every hour mattered, while the seal made caution indistinguishable from surrender. She copied what she had already observed. The exposed second layer corresponded to matrix S3 and to a dated plate showing Sarah Knoll's early fitting. The underlying jaw carried registration points for Bet Ramey's case. Mercy identified only the ear region and refused to guess the rest. Agnes wrote "unknown" beside 4 numbered pins. On the 3rd day, Latham's men arrived with padded crates. Sedge permitted removal of named public figures from the front gallery. He forbade them to touch the unnamed model until the hearing. While attention centered on the large crates, someone entered the rear molding room through its yard window. 5 of the 7 remaining matrices disappeared, along with the photographic plate showing young Latham. The window latch had been lifted with a thin blade. Moss's glazed putty bore the same pattern as a knife found in the pocket of Latham's removal foreman, but the man claimed any workman owned such a knife. The foreman was dismissed, not charged. Latham announced that Agnes had hidden the objects to improve her case. 2 nights before the hearing, the gallery seal was found intact and the nameless face nearly destroyed. Someone had turned the building's unused gas cock from the cellar, warming a pipe that ran behind the north wall. The heat did not enter through a broken lock. It used an old service system Latham knew from his youth at the Lantern. Wax ran down the figure's collar in pale folds. The outer layer collapsed. One glass eye loosened and fell. Agnes watched from beyond the seal until Sedge and the magistrate's clerk arrived. By then, saving the surface was impossible. They transferred the figure to a cool table, supported the remaining layers, and collected every detached piece on numbered trays. The unnamed woman no longer looked like anyone. Latham's solicitor called that convenient. A damaged composite could be interpreted however Agnes wished. For the first time, she believed he might win. The central model had lost its readable sequence. 5 matrices and the strongest photograph were gone. Tabitha was dead. The circle's legal status remained uncertain. Agnes had spent stable materials on Eliza and could not reproduce the layers for demonstration. If the magistrate classified the object as exhibition wax, Latham would take what remained and use the missing pieces to claim the method as his own. Edith found Agnes in the ticket office, holding Tabitha's old crescent tool. "You refused his money because he feared one face," Edith said. Was the face the only thing Tabitha trusted? Agnes looked at the open accounts, Eliza's signed entry, Mercy's prosthetic ear, and the grooved plate boxes. Tabitha had distrusted single records. Patient privacy required separation, a code on one object, a date on another, consent elsewhere, material recipes in supplier orders, measurements in matrices. The system survived only when independent pieces agreed. The destroyed face was the index, not the whole legacy. They worked without violating the seal. Holt had already printed 5 plates, including one earlier view of young Latham made before the original vanished. Quenby had sealed a copy of its wrapper notation. Sedge retained his inventory of matrices. Dr. Dane held the measurement card for Eliza's new shield. Mercy, Sarah, and Cora possessed appliances stamped with lantern codes. A surgical instrument maker in Sheffield confirmed supplying numbered alignment pins to Tabitha, not to Latham, across 15 years. The retired apothecary, Mrs. Honora Bale, answered Agnes's second letter. She had kept invoice counterfoils for beeswax, damar resin, pigments, and fine gauze, sold to the Lantern Restoration Circle. Several orders were paid from an account at Mardenwick Savings Bank. The bank acknowledged a dormant circle fund, but would disclose its balance only to recognized trustees. Tabitha's will named Agnes as owner of the building, not trustee of the circle. The last surviving trustee on the bank index was Dr. Bell's sister, Marianne, a former nurse living in Durham. Quenby sent a telegram. Marianne Bell agreed to travel if shown that patients wanted the work reopened rather than displayed. The women decided that question themselves. Mercy called a meeting in the safe ticket office. 9 former Lantern patients attended. 3 sent written statements. 2 asked that their codes never be connected publicly to names. Agnes did not urge them. The majority voted to seek restoration of the circle as a patient-governed charitable workshop. Personal cases would remain private unless each woman chose otherwise. Marianne arrived the next evening, carrying the circle's bank passbook and a packet of annual summaries. She had preserved them because Tabitha mailed copies after Dr. Bell's death. The figures matched Honora Bale's invoices and the stamped appliances. The balance was £94, 2 shillings and 11 pence. It belonged to the circle, not Agnes, and could be used only for patient treatment, materials, and training. The summaries revealed Latham's motive. His father's financing agreement required 1 shilling from every profitable public portrait to support the restoration work in exchange for access to Tabitha's colour and layering methods. Victor inherited the agreement and paid for 2 years, then stopped. The unpaid contributions, with interest disputed, exceeded £60. More damaging to his reputation, his Imperial Gallery's celebrated method was licensed, not invented by his family. Agnes's recent authorship claim formed a separate chain. Her clay studies of the Duchess had been witnessed by 2 sitters and dated through delivery receipts. A supplier sold her the exact glass eyes and hair tint used in the finished figure. Her sketchbook contained proportional corrections absent from Latham's first mold. Most tellingly, Latham's plaster negative preserved the chipped nostril caused by his premature removal. The corresponding clay positive remained in Agnes's discarded work crate, rescued by a porter who disliked seeing useful clay thrown away. No single item proved everything. Together, they told one consistent history. Latham offered a final settlement on the eve of the hearing. He would withdraw the guild accusation, pay Agnes £10, and permit her to retain the building if she assigned him all molds, formulas, photographs, and the right to describe the lantern method as a Latham family invention. The patient appliances would remain private, he promised, provided no former worker spoke publicly. Quenby advised her to read every clause before refusing. Agnes did. The offer treated silence as protection while transferring the power to decide who stayed silent. It would clear her reputation by erasing Tabitha, the circle, and the women whose work financed the method. She took the document to the patient meeting. 2 women wanted to accept because public proceedings might expose them. 3 feared losing the fund if the magistrate ruled against the circle. Mercy asked whether privacy could be protected without surrendering ownership. They revised their evidence list. Witnesses would use names only if they chose. Appliance codes could be matched in a private schedule examined by the magistrate, not read to the room. Holt's cropped prints would show technique without full faces. Quenby requested that sensitive portions be heard with the public excluded. The arrangement weakened the spectacle of Agnes's case and strengthened its ethics. Latham withdrew his settlement when he learned the women would not be displayed before reporters. His public position depended on portraying Agnes as an ambitious sculptor manufacturing grateful victims. Patient control deprived him of that narrative. On the same evening, Thomas Vere, Dr. Bell's former assistant, finally answered. He had ignored earlier letters because Latham paid him a small pension and warned that reopening the circle would bring claims against medical staff. After reading the settlement terms in the Chronicle, Vere sent his old fitting calendar. It used lantern codes, recorded Dr. Bell's supervision, and showed that Victor borrowed matrices 2, 5, and 8 on the dates Tabitha noted. Vere agreed to authenticate the calendar, but would not call himself courageous. Agnes found the limitation believable. At the hearing, the magistrate sat in the borough assembly room because the audience exceeded the court chamber. Latham arrived with 2 guild officers and 3 named figures from the lantern, now cleaned and polished. Agnes brought no restored marvel. On her table lay cracked wax fragments, coded appliances, contact prints, invoice counterfoils, alignment pins, the circle passbook, Sedge's plans, and Eliza's signed case record. Latham's solicitor began by asking whether the nameless face still existed. Its surface sequence was destroyed, Agnes said. So your interpretation cannot be tested. Parts of it can. The conclusions that cannot be tested are marked uncertain. He attacked Mercy's memory, the missing matrices, the absent plate, and Agnes's financial interest. Agnes agreed with every genuine limitation. Then Quenby presented independent matches, code L7 on Mercy's ear, matrix inventory L7 recorded before the theft, supplier pins of the correct diameter, a dated contact print of the fitting, and a circle payment for materials that week. Sarah's cheek produced a similar chain. Eliza's new shield demonstrated that the method could be repeated under medical supervision from measurements and disclosed materials. Marianne authenticated the circle summaries. Honora Bale authenticated her invoices. Holt explained the plate printing process without claiming the photographs showed more than they did. Sedge described the gas pipe and who had requested its original plans a month before Tabitha died. The borough clerk produced the request. It bore Victor Latham's signature. Latham said he had been assessing the property. Quenby asked why his assessment required the pipe behind the nameless figure and why he later denied knowing the instructional rooms existed. Latham changed the subject to Agnes's alleged theft. That was his mistake. Agnes placed the Duchess's clay study beside Latham's plaster negative. The chip aligned with a missing fragment of her positive. She showed the proportional corrections in her dated sketches and the bills for materials she purchased from her wages. The guild officers compared the work under magnification. One found Agnes's 3-stroke turn inside the eyelid, in a place copied by the negative, but inaccessible after casting. Miss Rowe could have added it later, Latham said. Not without cutting the plaster, the officer replied. There is no cut. Latham then claimed Agnes's mark belonged to Tabitha's method and was therefore his under the financing agreement. Quenby read the agreement aloud. It licensed color and layering for public exhibition. It granted no ownership of Tabitha's tools, patient matrices, or an apprentice's later portrait sculpture. In trying to seize Agnes's work, Latham admitted the agreement whose contributions he had withheld. The room did not erupt. Truth arrived as a narrowing of places where he could stand. The magistrate reserved final judgment for written evidence, but issued immediate protections. All remaining instructional materials were placed in Circle custody. Latham's chattel claim was limited to named public exhibition figures purchased under the mortgage. He was ordered to return the matrices already inventoried or account for their loss. The borough began a separate inquiry into the broken seal, heated gas pipe, and removal foreman. Consequences followed by documents rather than thunder. 3 missing matrices were delivered anonymously to Quenby's office. The foreman admitted Latham paid him to remove workshop objects before the hearing, though he denied touching the gas cock. A gas fitter testified that Latham had asked how quickly an old wall pipe could warm a display. The evidence supported charges for unlawful removal and property damage. It did not support attempted murder, and Agnes refused to exaggerate it. The guild cleared her of stealing the Duchess molds after inspecting the clay positive, sketches, receipts, and plaster fracture. Latham's name was removed from the portrait's authorship. He settled Agnes's withheld wages and paid damages rather than face a longer civil action. The Imperial Gallery's investors dismissed him from management when the unpaid Circle agreement and manipulated records became public. He retained money and friends. He did not retain unquestioned authority. Restoring the Circle required patient work. Marianne resumed as interim trustee. Mercy and Sarah were elected alongside her. The bank released the £94 for treatment and training, but none for repairing Agnes's private building. After negotiation, Latham's estate paid £48 in overdue contributions without admitting the full amount claimed. The trustees used it for appliances, physician fees, travel, and grants to women whose injuries prevented regular employment. Agnes received no hidden fortune. Her livelihood came first from the portrait orders that returned after the guild decision. She accepted them under written terms naming the sculptor, sitter, materials, and permitted uses of any mold. No likeness could be exhibited after a sitter withdrew consent. Working studies remained with the artist unless purchased separately. The conditions lost her 1 aristocratic commission and earned 3 others from patrons tired of Latham's secrecy. The Lantern building recovered more slowly. Sedge's plan divided it into safe phases. In August, workers replaced the skylight and rebuilt the fire-damaged rear parapet. In September, Moss strengthened the first-floor joists and installed north-facing shutters to moderate heat. The upper gallery remained closed through winter. Named public figures subject to Latham's mortgage were sold. Agnes did not borrow money to save sagging celebrities she could not use. Every phase competed with ordinary survival. A portrait commission paid for roof lead, then a doctor's bill for Edith consumed the amount reserved for plaster. When frost split a yard pipe, Agnes closed the workshop for 3 days rather than let patients enter without clean water. She lost 2 sittings and gained Sedge's confidence that posted safety rules meant something. The first-year accounts showed portrait income of £83, wages and materials of £51, repairs of £24, and almost nothing left for Agnes beyond food and rent saved by living above the ticket office. She raised prices for wealthy sitters instead of reducing apprentice pay. 1 patron left. Another accepted the increase after Edith explained that lifelike work did not become cheaper because a woman made it. The Circle and Agnes signed a lease for the cool storage room and clinic gallery. Rent was modest but real, preventing charitable work from depending on Agnes donating private property indefinitely. In return, the Circle financed washable tables, locked patient cabinets, and a separate entrance from the yard. The documents seemed unromantic. They prevented the workshop from becoming another place where goodwill blurred ownership until the most powerful person claimed everything. She kept the ticket office, front gallery, molding room, and 1 cool storage chamber. Portrait income paid rent on scaffolding and masons. A subscription exhibition of safe, consented technical models purchased ventilation screens and a hand pump. The town council contributed only after Sedge demonstrated that the repaired roof no longer endangered the neighboring lane. Community approval remained uneven. Some citizens wanted the lantern reopened as a chamber of horrors. Others thought facial appliances encouraged vanity. Agnes answered neither with speeches. Eliza returned for adjustments as her scar changed. A retired soldier came for a lightweight nose shell. A child with a birth difference received a protective ear form for school, but no public report used his name. Results, consent and costs entered the circle books where trustees and patients could read them. Dr. Dane held a weekly clinic in the front gallery. Agnes trained 2 women in taking non-contact measurements, carving plaster positives, tinting wax by daylight, and fitting gauze supports. Medical judgment remained with the physician. Sculptural construction remained with trained makers. The wearer made the final decision about appearance. Tabitha's work became a method with boundaries, rather than a secret attributed to one genius. The unnamed face could not be restored to its former illusion. Its layers had fused and torn, and Agnes would not invent missing regions to make it beautiful. She conserved the harder plaster core and mounted surviving wax fragments on separate supports. Beside them, a diagram showed which case chains were confirmed and which remained unknown. The display explained why the model had no name. It combined consented studies without turning any injured woman into a public spectacle. Tabitha's intent emerged from the ordinary things she left behind. Her supplier orders showed experiments over 20 years. Her plate wrappers separated clinical stages from public likenesses. Her will gave Agnes the building because Agnes understood form, but the circle agreement kept patient work beyond the owner's private control. She had designed succession as carefully as a layered face. Among the returned matrices was Agnes's apprentice eyelid. On its underside, Tabitha had scratched a note too shallow for Latham's men to notice. A good likeness does not ask whether a face is pleasing, it asks whether the person can recognize herself. Agnes placed the matrix in the teaching cabinet. She copied the sentence into the training rules, but did not display it as prophecy. Tabitha had been capable of error, impatience and pride. Her achievement mattered because others could examine and improve it. By the following July, the Lantern Wax Rooms had become the Lantern Portrait and Restoration Workshop. The old name remained in small letters above the door because creditors knew it and former patients could find it. The front gallery displayed commissioned portraits only with written permission. The rear rooms held plaster, gauze, wax, pigments, tools, and shaded windows instead of sensational figures. Edith managed appointments and charged every prosperous sitter the stated price. Those fees supported Agnes. Circle patients paid according to rules set by the trustees, never according to whether their stories would attract an audience. Mercy became the workshop's consent steward, a role she defined herself. No plate left storage, no case entered instruction, and no visitor saw a model until the person represented had agreed. Eliza apprenticed 2 mornings a week after her laundry employer refused to rehire her. Her protective shield became unnecessary as healing progressed, but she kept it in a box, rather than allowing the workshop to display it. She learned to carve ears first, because they demanded patience with asymmetry. The first one she completed was imperfect and comfortable. Its wearer preferred it to Agnes's more elegant version. "Then hers is the better work," Agnes said. The official reopening took place without wax royalty or gaslit spectacle. Former patients, tradespeople, physicians, and portrait clients entered by the same door. Sedge certified the first 2 floors. A locked gate made clear that the upper gallery remained under repair. No drapery concealed the unfinished plaster. In the cool north room, Agnes demonstrated the layering method on a neutral teaching form. She applied a translucent wax section over a gauze support, aligned it with numbered pins, and showed how a change in melting point could reveal or destroy the sequence. She did not reveal private codes. The audience saw technique without consuming a person's injury. Afterward, she returned alone to the conserved, nameless figure. Without its lifelike face, the plaster core seemed plain. Along the neck remained the ring of pinholes that first caught her attention. Beside the ear, on one surviving fragment, her three-stroke turn met Tabitha's older crescent. For months, Agnes had treated the shared mark as evidence of authorship. Now she understood it as evidence of transmission. A teacher had taken an apprentice's small idea, improved it, and used it for people neither could have served alone. Latham had mistaken inheritance for possession. The Lantern women had made it responsibility. Agnes closed the cabinet before the afternoon warmed. On the work table waited a new plaster positive bearing "No Hidden Maker's Claim." Eliza had carved one edge, Agnes another, and the wearer had marked the place that still pressed uncomfortably. They would correct it together.